Thank you for joining us February 25th for this edition of the Urban League Jobs Network Digital Career Success Series. My name is Kenneth Johnson, president of East Coast Executives and host of the Digital Career Success Series. Really excited to be here today, broadcasting live from the New York Urban League Centennial Career Fair at Microsoft Times Square. Wow, a great day today. I'm really excited because we have somebody here that just has been getting so much buzz. We have Minda Hart here today. Minda, I'm going to just jump right in because I'm so excited that you're here. And I know people are really excited. And everybody sees you sitting next to me right now. So with that being said, look, tell them about yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Ken. Excited to be here. You could be anywhere in the world and you're here with us today. And so my name is Minda Hart, and I am the founder of a career platform called the Memo. And recently I became author. I was able to add that to my resume, a best-selling author of a book, make sure I have it the right way, The Memo, What Women of Color Need to Know to Secure a Seat at the Table. I also teach at NYU Wagner, and I'm really excited to be here today.
Well, we're really excited to have you. This is a really interesting setup we have today because we literally have people sitting at the table. So with that being said, I want to speak to you just, you know what, let's just share a conversation. I really want to talk to you about why the Memo? Like, why did this happen? Take us through kind of your career progression and what got you here to kind of just deciding, look, I want to write a book.
Yeah, I think that the main thing is Toni Morrison, she said, write the book you want to read. And I was in corporate America for 15 years, and I kept waiting on a book that I could see myself in. And so once I realized that I needed to lean into my courage and talk about some of the things that we talk about like at brunch amongst our friends and in the group chat, but we sometimes don't talk about out loud. And so I started my company, The Memo, in 2015. I was actually on an Amtrak ride from DC to New York City, and I was listening to a Drake song, and through my earbuds came, did y'all boys not get the memo? And I realized that corporate America and many nonprofits hadn't gotten the memo that women of color or underserved groups deserve a seat at the table. We've worked too hard to lean out now. And I created a podcast, Secure the Seat, and then later the book. And so I just feel really honored to be able to write a book in which we get to see ourselves for the first time.
Yeah, I think it's much needed. We were speaking earlier and I was sharing that just you kind of have a movement going right now. And I can really appreciate all that I see and just the positive stuff that comes kind of through some of your social feeds. But I want to go back a little and just speak about kind of your career progression and kind of how you got to a point where, you know what, this is something I'm really committed to doing. People always say, I think I'm going to write a book, but then that book never happens. So how did you just continue to kind of move forward and make it happen for you?
Yeah, I'm a real big advocate that success is not a solo sport. Like, I wouldn't be sitting here by myself without a squad, without people who were speaking my names when I weren't in the room, going to those happy hours that I didn't feel like going to the break room birthday parties and showing my face. It was letting people know my value, right? Because sometimes as women of color or men of color, you're working so hard and you're waiting on someone to come and tap you on the shoulder and be like, it's your turn, it's your time. And when you're one of the only ones, that doesn't always happen. So I learned very quickly that I had to articulate my value and quantify my worth and let people know that, you know, hey, I'm about this life and this is what I'm doing and this is what I want. And I realized that being the only one, sometimes you're suffering in isolation. You settle into the microaggressions, you settle into the bias. And I realized, I don't know, I might be dating myself here, Ken, but Ashanti said, all the things that you accept be the things that you regret. And I realized that I accepted a lot in my career, and I didn't want the next generation to be just accept anything, and I wanted them to find the tables or build the ones that are right for them.
I'm starting to think you had a career in the music industry, right?
Yes.
Like, the music references here.
I drop bars.
Yeah. So let's speak about your career. Kind of what lane were you in prior to kind of stepping out here? You're out here so much. I see you at all of these companies all over the country. And it started making me think like, okay, I wonder what Minda was doing prior to just venturing out and making this her mission.
Yeah, so I was first generation college student, first in my family to graduate from college, and also the first one to enter into a corporate role. And so I didn't know what I didn't know, right? You know, I was the first one. I was a fundraising consultant. And so I went inside of different companies, universities and colleges and helped build endowment strategies. So don't anybody call me for fundraising advice, okay? But you tend to go to universities and you see $1 million, $1 billion families with their names on buildings. I help facilitate those processes. Wow. And so I was always the only one in the room at the dinner table, in meetings, and I just realized, what would it be like to add more seats, right? It's not taking away the privilege of the people that are around it, but what would it look like for me to use my influence to bring more people that look like me to the table? Sure. And so it took a while, right? Because I was so busy at work with my head down, working really hard. And then I finally looked up and I said, you know what, there's really all these inequalities going on. And what am I going to do to leave the workplace better than I found it? And it required me to do something to activate my influence. And so that's when I created my company in 2015. But had you told me that I would write a book in 2015, I probably would have ran the other way. But you don't realize that sometimes what's inside of you, someone else is waiting for that to release. And so there were so many things. I was definitely afraid to speak in public when I first started in my career. And one of the things that I talk about in the book is investing in yourself. And all of you in the room or online right now, you clearly care about your career because you're invested and you're here. And so for me, I took assessment of what are those tools that I needed in my toolkit to make me, the Beyonce of my industry, right? And so it's really important that there are these inequalities that are happening in the workplace, but again, there's also some things that we have control over to move forward.
No, but speaking about having control, so when I saw you speak, it was probably about a year ago, like today, at the Atlantic. You were at the event there, and you spoke about self-advocacy and kind of just being responsible for your part of the journey, right? How has that came into play, not only in your life in corporate America, but also as you kind of get up every day and travel to do what you do right now? Like, the commitment is real. Like, even just getting you on the phone can be a challenge sometimes. You're really busy, but you're doing good work. But from a self-advocacy standpoint, for people that are sitting in offices today trying to get that seat at the table, what is your advice to them?
Yeah, I think Audre Lorde put it best. Beware of feeling like you're not good enough to deserve it. And sometimes we work so hard and we have these workplace broken hearts. You may have been overlooked for the promotion or you didn't get the job. And so I think sometimes because of imposter syndrome and some of just the things that are out of our control, we forget what we brought to the table, right? We let other people define our narrative for us. And so I realized that even though I had the workplace broken hearts, I didn't get the promotion that was supposed to be mine. Sometimes we have this carrot dangled in front of us to keep doing the work. And what I realized, it was time for me to take control of my career. I couldn't wait for Bob or Jim or Susie to do it for me. I needed to be the one to let them know this is what I want. And I needed to be clear. Maslow, he has the hierarchy. And I use it in a career context of really understanding what you want out of your career. And once I realized what Minda wanted, then I was able to articulate that to people who had influence. And that self-advocacy is so important because, again, how can people help you if they don't know what you want?
Sure. I think that's a big piece of it, kind of knowing what you want. So it's really interesting that we're here and we're broadcasting live from the New York Urban League Centennial Career Fair on this digital career success platform. And I think the conversation for a lot of people here are that, all right, if I'm not in a leadership role, how do I have influence and impact and have some control over my career? What are your suggestions for people that are feeling that way?
Yeah, you don't have to have a title to be a leader, and you don't have to have a title to have influence. We all have a sphere of influence, and it's how we tend to use it, right? So for me, I realized that once I did have a seat at the table, it wasn't just good enough for me to kick my feet up and be like, oh, well, I'm good. I'm making X amount of dollars. I got great healthcare, but how am I using my influence to make sure that I shift the dynamics at the table? And so part of the memo is sharing that secret sauce, because sometimes we are the only ones and we get to a certain level of influence, so to speak, and we don't share, right? We block it from others. And for me, I feel like there's so much for everyone if you want it. And so one of the things that I think is so important is making sure that you connect with people. And so one of the chapters in my book is building your squad. And so who's on your team? You are the point guard on your team. So if you want a certain thing, making sure that you're leveraging the relationships. So maybe when I look back on my career, even before I had a seat at the table, I would getting good with the people in HR, right? Because they know the tea that's coming down the pipeline. They know the roles. They know who's getting shoved out next week, So getting good with them. Also, assistants, right? So maybe I didn't have the ear yet of the CEO, but who is their executive assistant?
Sure.
Making sure I'm building relationships with them. From the top down, bottom up, everybody plays a role at the organization. I know when I was in corporate America, my boss, he was at the top of the food chain, but in a matter of days, he was at the same level as I was, wow. Right? Because things happen in reorgs. And so you just never know who is going to be that person to help you. But also, who are you helping? Because I think it's really easy for us to say, who isn't helping us, but who are we helping to advocate to? So we want people to speak our names in the room and building those relationships with your peers and telling people what you want. Then when something comes up, people will remember you because you mentioned that thing.
Got you. So people that I've spoken to that have really kind of taken grasp of your book and kind of it really resonated with them, spoke about your continuous and consistent, use of the word networking and how important that is. What I want to speak about that a little, just because I think your book can be so powerful to people. I've spoken to people, we shared this recently. I was speaking to someone, and I'll share this with the audience, and I told them that Minda was coming to do this Digital Career Success Series event. And they said to me, I have the picture of her book as my screensaver. And I was like, wow, how powerful is that people are walking around with your book as their screensaver. So I sent it to Minda, and of course she wanted to share it, but not to promote herself, just to say, like, listen, we're doing something impactful out here. If you don't mind, would you share a passage? Is there a passage in your book that you just look onto and say, no, I want to share this with people?
Yeah. My life was a lot different a year ago. And I get a little emotional because, I went on a 28 city book tour, and I'm in the 40s of cities, and I never intended for that to happen. It was leaning into my courage and pushed aside my caution. The things that I thought that I couldn't do, I made sure that, I am my biggest advocate. We're in New York City, yeah. Ken, empire state of mind. There's no room for enemy state of mind. It's very important that we build our mindset up so that you can, again, beware of feeling like you're not good enough to deserve it. I'm not famous. My agent went out and shopped this book around to 5 major publishers. 4 of them said, no, there's no audience for a book like this. We are that audience.
Yes.
And it's not just for women of color, it's for men of color, anybody that feels marginalized, because our stories matter. And so the first chapter is called The Ugly Truths, because there's some ugly truths that happen in the workplace that sometimes we don't talk about, or that maybe our counterparts aren't aware of. And so I'm just going to read you a little bit. It's called Racial Growing Pains. After college, I entered the workforce like most newly minted graduates, excited to be out on my own and prepared to live out my dreams. But before I could live out the dream, I had to go through some racial growing pains that had me questioning my sanity and how long I would last working with white people. Not because I didn't like them, but because of the problematic stuff that came out of their mouths a few times a day. I vividly recalled 2 examples of this kind of nonsense as if it happened yesterday. First, I remember picking up my boss from a big client meeting. It was Sunday afternoon. I was wearing a summer dress, sandals, and a fresh manicure. The color was burnt orange. My boss and another colleague hop into the rental car. About 10 minutes down the road, my boss jokes, "You people love your bright colors." He laughed like it was comedy night at the Apollo. My other male colleague chimed in with his agreement. I will never understand how my nail color turned into a 15-minute conversation on how Black people love bright colors. Mind you, this was from their limited perspective on us people. I laughed it off, despite being internally annoyed and thoroughly confused. I happen to like burnt orange. The last time I checked, Crayola didn't make a special edition of bright crayons for Black people. I was too young and not well-versed enough to address my boss in a manner that would make this a teachable moment for him. I regret letting him get away with such a lame stereotype. Soon I began to think that this must be normal white workplace behavior because things like this came out of his mouth on a daily basis. Perhaps if I had said something, he never would make another woman of color feel bad about her bright colors again. But I didn't know if I could. I didn't know if I should address occurrences like these. I would tell myself that he didn't mean any harm so that I could push through my workday and not internalize what he really meant, which was to make me feel different and ostracized. When women of color are not encouraged to speak out on situations that involve race, and when we do, sometimes HR isn't the most welcoming. I'm going to skip a little because I just got to give you a Sam's Club sample. Hopefully you'll all go and purchase the book. There are things you don't find out until you experience them. There were plenty of times I wanted to run out of the office and cry, but I had to suck it up and remain strong. And there was one moment in my career where I got tired of being the strong Black woman, and I broke down in tears in my manager's office. I mean, where do the broken hearts go of women of color when we can't take it any longer? The Memo.
Wow, incredible. Amazing, I love it. You started with something that happened outside of the walls of the office, right? Mm-hmm. And I kind of never thought about it from that perspective, right? Like, work can be all encompassing. So it doesn't necessarily mean things that are happening when you walk through the doors. The people that are doing work from the heart, they take that everywhere with them. But you also take the feelings of, and not being valued and things of that nature with you as well. How do people manage that?
Yeah, I think we have to acknowledge that these things are happening, right? Because I think for so long we've just pushed them under the rug, and we've told ourselves that this is what we have to do. And you realize that there's so much trauma that we've now packed into our bag. Erykah Badu tells us to pack light, but it's really hard to pack light when you have all of this racial trauma inside of your bag. And so I think it's important that we find that healing. And I talk a little bit about that in the book, because you can't fully secure your seat when you're oppressed, or when you don't, you're triggered from, I talk about, PTSD in a sense, because if you do leave one situation, you're taking those things that happened from the last job, you put it in your bag and you move on to the next one. And I think as Black women in particular, we are used to making it work. We've been conditioned to make it work. And so I'm saying, what would it look like if we centered ourselves? What if we released that? And what would it look like to breathe for a change? And that may mean leaving a situation that isn't good for us.
So speaking about leaving a situation, so we were speaking about just the fact that Black women in masses are leaving corporate America to form their own businesses or to kind of go in the role of consultants. You said something really interesting. You were saying that, I get it, but we really do need people to kind of stay in and fight the fight, right? Mm-hmm. Just tell me about how your perspective on that in general. What's that look like to the author of the memo?
Yeah, well, I guess it's almost like double dutch, right? Like I'm on this side of the fence, but I left corporate America, but not necessarily. So here's the thing, Ken. I don't want us to defer our dreams because that people don't get it, right? Because of bad leadership. And many of us are leaving corporate America or nonprofit, not because we want to be the boss of our own company, because we're tired of the nonsense that's happening. We're tired of not being advanced. We're tired of not making the money that we're supposed to make. We have all of these degrees and all these certificates. And after a while, you're just like, let me see what else I can do. And so I wrote the memo to say, you've worked too hard to lean out now. Don't let them defer your dreams of the C-suite, but you may have to find another table. Maybe it's the one you've been working at, but if I tell you it's the one across the street, that might give you what you want, right? And so leaning into that. And I think that we talk about wealth creation and closing the wealth gap. It's going to take some of us to stay in corporate America and stay at the table and influence those rooms that need us most. But if we realize we're not alone, then we might be able to push through it a little bit better.
Speaking about not being alone in general, right? So as people tend to navigate their way through corporate America, and I think you said something really interesting about being kind of a first generation person to come into corporate America. So no one's really there that you kind of trust completely to kind of teach you how to move and how to navigate that space, right? So you have to identify sponsors and mentors and things of that nature. How do people go about putting themselves in a position to receive that type of recognition from the internal stakeholders that allows them to consider themselves as a sponsor or mentor?
Yeah, and there is a difference, right? There's a difference between someone who's mentoring you.
Explain the difference to the audience, please.
Yeah, I think mentorship, we all can be mentors to one another. I can call an old teacher and say, hey, how do you dress for success, right? I can consider her as a mentor. Or someone in HR might say, hey, you might want to go to Nordstrom's and, buy these black shoes. Though they're giving you advice, right? Or maybe even how to negotiate a salary. That is a mentor. A sponsor is someone who actually has some skin in the game, who has influence to take you to the table, help you get more money. That's the person that will vouch for you. And it's really easy to find a mentors. You can get online right now on Twitter and have 10 mentors, but someone who sponsors you, that's someone who's invested in your success.
Sure.
And I think Diddy says, tell your friends to get with my friends and we'll be friends. Yeah. How you get sponsors is building relationships. Like, it's hard for people to vouch for you if they don't know you. So it requires us to get out of our cube sometimes, come to events like this, meet different people and tell people what we need, so that after a while they may be able to vouch for you. I talk about a story in my book where we'll call him Bob for this purposes, but I was the only one. So my sponsors and mentors did not look like me, so I had to work a little harder for them to see me as the obvious winner. But I went to the happy hours. I went, I got me a karaoke song and, all of those things. And I realized that I'm not going to get ahead by just working hard, coming in early and staying late, that there's this other game being played. And once I realized that it was relationship building, like Becky, she knew that Bob liked the red velvet cupcakes because she was at the team dinners. Like, I didn't know about those things because I was at home watching Girlfriends, right? But once I switched the game up and realized that, I can do this too. And a lot of what's happening in the workplace, sponsorship is that, I hate to say it, but that likability factor at times. And how do you navigate those? And I think navigating office politics can make or break someone's career. And if you don't know that as, young or old in the career, it can really be a detriment to your upward mobility.
You said something so important. I think people often believe that their mentors and or sponsors have to be they have to see them in the mirror, right? And a lot of times that's culturally, like a black male has to have a black male mentor. Not necessarily the case. Yeah. So as you speak to people, so I always talk about when you're approaching people regarding mentorship, like, where do you add value to that relationship as well? How do you suggest that people just go about identifying the right people organizationally, or even within? Should they identify people outside of the organization to be mentors? Like, what's the blueprint?
Yeah, I think I might be dating myself, but MySpace, if anybody remembers that, but I talk about this top 8, having those people in your organization inside and outside, because you never know when you might need someone or vice versa. And so for me, it was having my peers, but then also on the outside. But I think a lot of people get tripped up on mentorship. It's not, I think now we don't have to be so formal, right? I don't have to slide a paper and say, will you be my mentor? Like, you can actually just be conversing with people. Like, Ken, I look at you as a mentor, but I've never formally asked you to be my mentor, but you give advice to me and opportunities. And I think that the more eventually, right, and now a sponsor, you asked me to come and do this. And I think that my mentor turned into my sponsor, but it took relationship building.
So I'm gonna be out there in the streets telling people I'm your mentor now, right? My mentee is she's out at PayPal today. Like, yeah, all right. I welcome that. I welcome that. All right. So, know what? That brings another question. So, with you having the platform that you have, and just the exposure alone, I'm sure people are coming to you, probably reaching out to you saying, hey, listen, I want you to be my mentor and things of that nature. Tell me about some of that.
Yeah, my DMs are full.
Yeah, I'm sure.
They definitely are. But I realize that I can't physically mentor every single person, but I wrote this book so that I could be your champion in your bag, right? I can be your champion on the train. And I also host an annual or a monthly book club online at mindaharts.com, so that if you can't get to me or I can't get to you, that you still have access. And I think that that's important, that we have access. And again, I can serve as your mentor. Follow me on Twitter, get on the listserv. I mean, again, we can be each other's mentor. There's tons of people that I use as mentors online, like mentors in my head, that I've never met, right? That I've never submitted information, but they're talking about speaking opportunities. They're talking about how to leverage relationships, and we can all, there's so much at our fingertips right now that we don't have to get stunted by the physical aspect of mentorship.
You know, you've managed to, and this is just from watching my mentee from afar. You've really managed to kind of bring people together and join. So as you see your platform kind of growing, what I've noticed that I found really interesting is that I've seen people of all races and nationalities and all genders kind of standing up and showing your book. Like I suggest that people read the memo. What do you credit that to? And how does that make you feel?
Yeah, it's very, very humbling.
Sure.
It is. And I realize that, again, if it's not just me, I don't want to be the only one talking about the inequalities in the workplace, right? I want us to be able to change the narrative. And so if me being a little brave ignites someone else being a little braver, and we start to change the culture and we shift the culture together, then again, success is not a solo sport. My job isn't done if the workplace stays the same. Mm-hmm. And it's not just for our unconscious bias would say this is only for women of color, sure, this book, but it's really for everyone, because how do you change the organization? How are you as a manager invested in your diverse talent? You need to be able to know what they're going through on a day that a Trayvon Martin situation happens. You know, these are the things. Being culturally competent is very important. And even our so-called allies, if you're an ally, then how can you help me if you've never read what it's like to be me, right? And so this is a book where I hope it's a conversation starter, but it also, I look forward to the future because the future of work will require different stories being told. Okay. And because this book became a bestseller, that means someone else can tell their story too, right? So now it's signaled to the masses. So it's not just about me, it's bigger than me. It's about making the next generation, allowing them to have a workplace that's more equitable than maybe I found it.
Speaking of next, is there a next? Are we looking at the memo too, or something of that nature? Are you working on that now?
Yeah, I am. So there is a next. There's a couple of next, but I can't really talk about those at the moment. But the memo and paperback will be out in the fall, and so there will be some new content. But if you haven't had a chance to get it, please, wherever you like to buy your books, it is available. Yeah,
I think that how amazing is that? Like wherever you like to buy your books, it's available. So when you kind of start out on this road, I was reading something you said the other day, and you were saying, I honestly believed that no one was going to buy my books, like just my family maybe, right? Yeah. And so think about that just from the standpoint, even if you kind of went into a corporate environment, the doubt, the self-doubt and things of that nature, the negative talk, especially for, women of color or anybody for that matter, just how do you manage that? And I'm looking at you just managing it from the standpoint of this is a new venture, I'm stepping out as an author. But in your career, how did you manage the negative self-talk and the doubt?
Yeah, I definitely had to reset my mind. And one of the things that I know we don't always talk about is therapy. And when I started therapy many years ago, when I told some family members, they were kind of upset with me that I would even consider going because, we go to the church, right?
I was going to say, we're Black people.
But I realized
Minda's crazy.
Yes, exactly. It wasn't as popular as it is now, the thought. But I realized that because I was the first one in my family to go into this environment, and I was met with all of these different experiences, that I started to question if I even belonged. The first time I sat at a fancy white tablecloth dinner, there were so many forks. I'm like, what? And so some of those
the real situations, seat at the table,
yeah, you start to question, do you even belong? And it really required me to remind myself that I belonged in every room, that I am the room, right? Regardless of what other people might say. And it took time for me to reset my brain to say, they're lucky to have me, and not in a bragging or unhumble type of way, but I worked really hard to get here, and so sometimes we forget the work that we put in. And so don't forget what you bring to the table.
Wow. So speaking of bringing things to the table, we would be negligent to have this great room of people here for the Digital Career Success Series, UL Jobs Network, and not ask some questions, see if anybody has questions for Minda. We got one in the back.
So I heard the imposter syndrome and being the only one on the table, working so hard, you have the degrees and you have am working through them. The imposter syndrome still working on it. Feeling that I can apply to Google as opposed to applying to a company that, not shooting for the star. It's almost like I have to have a half day just to convince myself to send it to Google, send it to Microsoft, send it here, Adobe. And what is your advice when, let's shorten the half day to like 5-10 minutes. How do you do that?
Yeah. Well, you answered it. You
Okay.
just have to do it, right? You have to do it, but then also finding your squads, finding your team members that encourage you to do it, right? Because it's going to take some time to unlearn what we've been telling ourselves. So for me, I tell myself a new story about myself every day I wake up, regardless of the day I had before, that I am a winner, that I am enough, right? And I think it's important that we remind ourselves that we've worked hard for this, right? That we're in Black History Month. Our ancestors worked hard. We are direct beneficiaries of their successes and their wins. And this is ours, right? And so I remind myself of that each and every day, even when I don't feel it. So it's telling yourself that new story every day and that you press send on it, right? Because there's, I don't know the exact numbers, but there's stats out there that says that men, they will apply for a job and have, 2 out of 5, right? And we want to have all the levers, right? And so believe in yourself and put it, because again, if we're not our best advocate, who else is going to be?
And I think just in today's workplace, there are so many platforms out here for you to see people that are a lot like you having success at those companies, right? We're here today at Microsoft Times Square, New York Urban League, National Urban League. How amazing is that? And we're here because of people like a gentleman named Alfred, that's an African-American male who's out here like supporting us and working here in this space. So I just think that's an incredible thing right there. You can actually see people, whether it's online or just in the flesh, that are doing the work. So just hold on to that and just keep building your network. Indeed. Any other questions? Anybody? We got anything else? So yes, please.
Hi, my name is Stephanie. Just wanted to ask you, how long did it take you to overcome those fears that you speak about?
Yeah, I still have fears, right? But I let my curiosity be larger than my fear. And I'm curious every day, every minute. And even, the nerves of sitting in this chair and talking to you today, I got to get over that fear. And so, and I lean into it because I know that somebody else needs to be a benefactor of me leaning into it, right? And so I think about this book, for example. What if I didn't do it? And actually, I had the opportunity for 6 months, and I said, no, I'm not the one to do it. I'm not the one to do it. And then I finally said, okay, God, clearly you are showing me that I need to write this book, and I took it. And I sit and think, what if I hadn't have done that, right? How many people who showed up to the book events, who are reading this book, finding some clarity, finding some healing, right? And now we all can have this larger conversation. And so think about, it's not just us, but who will benefit from us being curious.
Wow. So we have an online question. And the question is, what's the best advice you can give to help plan a career rather than simply work to keep a job?
That's a good question.
It's such a real question because people are sitting in that space every day and they feel like helpless in their career journeys.
Yeah, it's difficult. I spent 15 years in corporate America, nonprofit roles, and one company I spent 10 years. And I realized that when I left, I gave some of the best years of my life to that place. I had so much loyalty and I didn't have it in return. And I realized that at some point I have to be loyal to me. At some point I have to center myself. And we all know when we're being mistreated. You all know those things, right? So I'm not saying you quit your job today. You have to be smart, right? Plan for that. But give yourself that space and that grace to find the career, find the roles that bring you joy. Because if we've seen anything in the last, 24 hours or, the Kobe Bryant situation and his daughter and the others, do something that brings you joy. Like, regardless of how you feel about Kobe Bryant, for 20 years, he was able to do something that he loved every day. And so what are you going to do to give yourself that space to be able to find those things that bring you joy and hopefully bring you a check too?
Always a plus, right? Always a plus. Speaking of checks, let's check in. Any questions out here? Yes.
I'd like to hear more about
the services that you offer or the space that you're creating and what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you for that. So my company is called the Memo, and that started in 2015, and it was to help prepare women for their seat at the table. And that may be through public speaking courses, that may be through salary negotiation, how to network, because some of us do it better than others. And so if you go to myweeklymemo.com, we have career boot camps as our signature product. And so check that out. We're there to support you.
Great. Yes.
So I've been thinking about what leaning in looks like for different people. And I've also heard and have experienced as a woman of color, the cost of leaning in as a person of color.
Mm-hmm.
Can you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually, are you sure you're not a plant? It's actually what prompted me to even write this book, because there's this book, if you hadn't heard, called Lean In, and it came out in 2013. And I read a lot of business books, and it was that book that said, you know what, we've been leaning in. If I lean in anymore, I'm going to be licking the tables. You know what I mean? Like it's, there's no more leaning in, and it's different for us, right? Because there is a cost sometimes, but who's talking about that, right? But all these companies are buying this book and passing it out and creating, and they're not thinking about what it's like to be me and lean in. And so that's what kind of pushed me to start my company and then later write the book, because I wanted to tell a different story. Here's what happens when you do lean in, and here's what happens when you show up in the room as a Black woman, and how our experiences are very different from others. And for example, for those who love stats, 1 in 25 Black women of color get advanced to the C-suite, whereas 1 in 5, right? White women make 79 cents on a dollar, whereas women of color anywhere from 48 to 64 cents. So when we're talking about women in the workplace, what women are you talking about, right? And so that's what I wanted to be able to center the conversation on us, because who else nobody's talking about us. They're just throwing us in this, rinse, wash, repeat cycle, if you will. And so I think it's really important, if we are the future of work, statistically speaking, then what are those roles that we're going to have, and who's going to be centering us? And so I think I realized that we needed to get ahead of this thing so that we have our rightful seats in the future of work.
Well, I'm listening to you share those stories, and I'm wondering, right? So people that traditionally don't experience that type of unconscious pushback, we'll say. Let's just call it that for a second. I want to believe it's that, but let's call it that. How do you feel when they get it? Like when people get it, that may not necessarily look like you or may not have that same experience?
Yeah, I've had the pleasure of going into a lot of Fortune 500 companies and talking about my book. And it's interesting when, white men and women, or even men of color, read the book, and for white men and women, they're like, oh my God, I had no idea that this was going on. Why didn't anyone tell me? And I said, well, they might have been, but then again, there's that fear sometimes to even speak out on some of the inequalities that have silenced us for so many years inside the workplace. And so it's been really great to open up this conversation with them, because now that you know that these things are going on, or now you have women of color on your team, how are you going to engage them? How are you going to be invested? Because there's another stat that says 70% of women of color feel like their managers are not invested in their success. That's a direct correlation to the seats we have and the promotions we get. And so I'm really adamant about making sure that our managers are equipped to manage diverse talent, because that's where a lot of the inequities happen. We're not leaving because we don't like working at said place. It's who we're working for. And so I think there's a lot that we have to unpack.
and you were speaking earlier, you don't know what you don't know, right? So unless we're sharing how we feel and what that experience is, it's kind of like, people talk about I statements and you statements, and like, how are you feeling? Like, I feel like this. But if you're not sharing that, how can you expect people to automatically pick up on that when they're in the same tunnel that we all are in? Like, they're worried about their careers as well. Like, we're telling people, you have to support my career aspirations. I'm out here trying to do my thing as well. So how do you balance that? Like, what is that piece of it for you? Where's the safe place to share some of that frustration? Is it your one-on-ones? Is it your reviews? Where do you share that as an employee?
Yeah, I think it is that it goes back to self-advocacy, because if we're not, so let's take, when I was on the road, I met a woman, or met many women, but one in particular, she waited till the end and she had tears in her eyes. And she said, every day at work, somebody's touching my hair and it's really it's driving me crazy. And I said, so why won't you tell them to stop touching your hair? And she said, well, they might call me an angry Black woman and all the things. And I said, that is true. I said, but you know what? Every day, you're not even able to function at a high level, bring your authentic self to work, in a sense, thinking about their feelings and centering them. And I said, the only way they're going to stop is if you tell them.
Right.
And I said, and how are they going to know? And she's like, well, what if? And I said, well, what if you centered yourself? And I think part of this, and I get it that it's hard, right? Because for so long we haven't been doing that. But the only way we're going to shift these dynamics is if we have these critical conversations, and that our allies or managers are courageous listeners. And so, but we have to have these conversations. Otherwise, we're just going to be talking about this 5 years from now, 10 years from now.
Courageous listeners. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
I'd like to follow up on the lean-in question, because wasn't there an evolution to the lean-in, and how do you feel as a woman of color when she came back after she had the experiences that she had and said, oh my God, this lean-in thing was sort of short-sighted, if I'm giving a correct synopsis?
I'm glad that Sheryl Sandberg had that moment, right? And so I think that the real telling will be how women of color feel at her company, right, going forward. But I think she's trying to right her wrongs. We all have room for space and grace and learning. And so hopefully her and I will have a conversation one day.
It's resonating. I'm leaning in myself. I felt myself like kind of. All right. So we have a question from the online audience. Everyone is at a different stage in their careers. What are a few practical steps other than networking that we often overlook, but is within our reach that should be done?
I touched on it a little bit, but professional development. So you can't leave that in the hands of anybody else. So take an assessment of your skills, your strengths, and maybe some areas that could be enhanced, and figure out what it is you want. So if you do want that seat at the table, and not all of us want that, and if you don't want that, that's okay too, right? We have options. But if you say, I want to be a vice president, or I want to be a chief whatever officer, what are some of those skills that you see those people have right now? So maybe public speaking is one of them. If you're at the table, you're really to be effective, you're gonna need your voice amplified, sure. Right? So maybe taking a public speaking course or two, volunteering in group settings to be the person that speaks out on the reporting and putting yourself in those situations. I think the other thing is there's something called Clifton Strength Finders. And if you're not familiar with that, definitely Google it. And that helps you identify some of your areas for strength. And sometimes we don't even know. We might think in our minds like, oh, I'm good at these 5 things. And taking that test will actually tell you some other areas that you're good in. And then the last thing I think is learning how to tell your career story. So when I was in corporate America, I pivoted a little bit into different titles, not because I hit all of the job descriptions, right? But I was able to tell the transferable skill story. Mm-hmm. And I think once we learn how to tell our career story in a way that's empowering and adds to the bottom line of those future roles that we want, there's a lot of jobs that we could have that we may not even be applying for.
Yeah, and I think people are telling their story just through social a lot as well. Like as a recruiter, we're really heavy on LinkedIn. Like we're going and we're seeing some of your story there. Are you a subject matter expert in space? Are you actively kind of just sharing information? Tells me a lot about you as a candidate. So I think there's so many ways to tell a story, but people are really, really honing in on the stories that you're telling as professionals. So be mindful of that. I have a question from online. In my experience, when you are actively looking for work as an experienced, highly educated Black woman, it takes you much longer to secure a new role. What are your thoughts on this?
It's real. One of the things that I talk about in my class at NYU Wagner is ageism. And I think it's really important that we have those conversations. So it's because I've met a lot of Black women on the road who are, 55 and up, who have all these great skill sets, but they're having a hard time finding a role, or they're being, pushed out. And I think it's really important that how are we using our influence? Because one day I pray that I get to be 55, in the workplace, or 65, and I don't want to stop working just because someone thinks that I should be done, right? And so if you have the opportunity to hire a diverse slate of candidates, make sure that you're also adding age on there too, because sometimes we're not thinking about all the different intersections that women or men have, or those who identify non-binary, however. So I think it's important that we also talk about ageism, because that's another form of discrimination, and none of us will be exempt from that.
Right, hopefully not. Any questions in the room? Yes.
The come out and be seen. I'm a little bit of an introvert. I have to talk to myself.
You're kidding me.
I want to be home eating ice cream. And then there's okay, Brene Brown has a very good, take off the armor, put up a cloak of courage.
Mm-hmm.
And not just, this week, every single minute, you walk into a room, you're stepping in, you're doing that. But on those days where I really don't want to, I don't want to be with people, I don't want to deal with people, I don't want to have to handle people. How have you worked at handling the people where you don't wind up in jail?
Well, we live in New York City, so we're inundated with people. I don't know how to get away from it. But I think back to, you said Brene Brown, she talks about being in the ring. And I think that we cannot change some of the things that we're doing if we're not in the ring, right? And being in the ring requires meeting people, building those relationships. And so, you could say I'm not an introvert, or I'm not an extrovert, or I am, or I am not. But regardless of those labels, it still will require you to be in the ring, right? Still be your best advocate. And so let's take the happy hour thing, for example. You don't have to get on the table and get everybody to sing the song with you, but be strategic and find those one or two people that you speak to each time, right? You don't have to make it a big party, but it's being strategic with who sees you, right? Being seen. And so I think once we look at it, not just going to the happy hour because we have to be at the happy hour, the work birthday party, or the Hamptons weekend, it's who do I need to talk to? Who needs to know what I'm doing, right? So oftentimes we might even be in the elevator with the CEO or someone high up, and they'll say, hey, Minda, how are you doing? And sometimes we'll shrink and say, oh, we're doing good. That's your opportunity to say, actually, Bob, I'm doing really great, and I'm working on boop, 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 boop. Like this, these are using those opportunities to really shine and be seen. So figure out what's comfortable to you.
Yes.
So thank you for coming. You mentioned, you have to sit at the table, you bring others with you. You also mentioned therapy and taking care of self. Can you share a little bit about how you do that and what that looks like as well?
Yeah, I think we all have to find that room for space, right? And maybe it's 5 minutes, in the room and you shut the door, but I think we do have that because we carry so much just showing up as Black people, as people of color, and we don't give ourselves that space to heal. And for me, yes, church, that's a place I love to go, but then also I knew that I needed to talk to kind of a third party that I could just be open with, right? And at the time I had really great health insurance, so I was able to leverage that and go. But I think, it's so important that you center yourself. So find those outlets. If it's working out, if it's yoga, if it's massages, whatever your thing is, but find a thing, right? Because we do need that space, because it's, I feel like a lot of our health issues result from toxic work environments, right? Mm-hmm. You can't fully secure your seat when you have all of these issues going on. So I think it's really important to find that thing, right? So I would encourage each of us to do that.
I just want to chime in. We have a lot of people online and listening in, and I think it's good to share comments. So this is from Jamise Cherry. Thank you for your story about the nail polish color. I had a coworker confide in me that she was asked not to go to a client pitch because she had braids in her hair. Frustrating that this still happens. That's so real.
Yeah, it is.
And I know there's some things going on here in New York City, even in particular. And I know the National Urban League has an initiative about, I think it's regarding the Crown Act, things of that nature. Familiar?
Yes.
Want to speak a little bit on that?
I'm glad there is a
Yeah.
Crown Act. I wish that, when I started in my corporate career, I would have never imagined wearing braids just because I knew that I could never show up that way. I wanted to, right? Or if I went on vacation that Sunday night, I had to spend all night taking those braids out before I got into the office on Sunday or on Monday. But I love that states are adopting this where they cannot discriminate against your hair, natural hairstyles. And I think that's important because I don't think some of our counterparts realize that there's a job description to do. But oftentimes we're thinking about all the other factors before we even get to the actual job.
Sure.
How will they perceive us? Am I professional enough? Am I not? And all these mental gymnastics that we're doing. And we don't even get a chance to just do the job because we're managing our emotions, their emotions, and so forth. And I'm excited again to see what the future of work looks like when we can show up in braids, an afro, and when you have more people at the table, those things don't seem so taboo, right? But it's taboo for people who never see them.
All right, I'm going to lock in on this last question because I think it's really interesting. So, a question came from the online audience. What has been the reaction from your white friends and allies to your book? You point out some hard truths about working with whites and women or white women. What has been their response?
I thank God for it, that I think we're just in a climate where you can have a little more harder conversations
Sure.
than you once could. I think if this book came out a few years ago, I probably wouldn't be as well receptive. But I think right now we realize that we're at a critical time in our country and inside the workplace, that it's important that equity is for everyone. And oftentimes, Black women, I feel we're the heart and the kidney. We make the workplace function, and we're not getting our due inside of many companies. And so I think it's high time that we talk about it. And unfortunately, there is this empathy gap between many white women and women of color. And I think in order for us to solve that and come together, kumbaya, we have to talk about some of those hard truths, those ugly truths, right? But that's an opportunity to make the workplace better. And the question about my friends, it's been funny that some of my friends, white friends along the way have come to book tour, and they're like, oh my God, I saw myself in some of that. And I said, and I take responsibility for kikiing with them growing up on things that I let them say that they shouldn't have been saying, and even opening up that conversation. And so one thing that I found though, Ken, I wrote this book, as an adult woman, but I realized after writing the book, as a child, as a Black young girl, there were things that I settled for early before I even got to the workplace. And so I think it's really important that we remind ourselves as, if we want to be called our government name, make people learn how to say it. All of these different things that we sometimes make concessions for a seat that we may never get. So what would it look like if you centered yourself?
Wow. Amazing. Amazing. So appreciative of you coming out today, Minda, and so appreciative of the audience. What I'd like you to do for us, please, let everyone know where they can find the book, how they can stay connected with you, social media, anything like that that you'd like to share in closing.
Yes, thank you again for having me, Ken. Great conversation, great moderation. Thank you so much. Thank you to the Urban League and Michael for hosting us. Thank you to you for being a great audience. And you can go to mindaharts.com to stay connected. I'm most active on Twitter, so if you get down on the Twitter streets at Minda Harts, and then please tell people if you know somebody that could use the memo, please share it. Amazon, Target, Barnes & Noble, wherever you like, Apple, wherever you like to buy your books.
And this has been such an amazing day. I really want to just take this time to thank a few people. Of course, the National Urban League team, Wanda Jackson and her team at the National Urban League, Beverly Felix, Michaela's here today. Thank you so very much for all you guys do just to make this possible. I know I put you guys in some difficult spots, like let's do it from the New York Urban League Career Fair, right? So I'm thankful and appreciative of that. Also, I want to thank everybody from the New York Urban League for just kind of understanding that we're all working together, and we're just trying to deliver some of the best content and best information that we can to career seekers, not only in New York City, but really across the world. And when we have the opportunity to bring people like Minda Hart in, it just kind of makes this all worthwhile. I want to thank everybody that came out to the career fair today and then took your time away from the employers to kind of hang out and sit in on this session with myself, Minda Hart. We're just thankful for you guys. Thank you so very much for doing that. So to Arva Rice and her team, Diana Coleman, the people that put this career fair together. I'm just grateful for all that you guys do to make this happen. So with that being said, Minda, we do this again next Wednesday. We do this again March 18th. I know you're not with us, but we will be doing a session called Flip the Zip on March 18th. And basically that's all about how people can relocate their career as a diverse professional. So I'm excited about that. And I'm excited that we're going to just continue to share this relationship and share your information out on the platform. And man, good luck to you.
Thank you so much.
Do your thing. Keep traveling.